I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I didn't see it coming. Lucy and I had been married for almost 10 years, and for most of that time, I'd have told anyone who'd listen that I was one of the lucky ones. We had built a life that felt like something solid, dependable, something that I could hang my hat on and come home to every night. 2 beautiful kids, a modest house, a career I enjoyed, and a partner I believed had my back. If there were cracks in our foundation, they were small enough to ignore, at least, I thought they were. The changes started so gradually that I barely noticed. Lucy began working late more often, saying her department at the firm was short-staffed or that an important client needed her attention. At first, I dismissed it as a rough patch at work, something we'd all been through. I even tried to be supportive, taking over more at home so she wouldn't feel stressed. But over time, the late nights became routine, and I noticed little details that made me uneasy. A different perfume lingering on her clothes, outfits I hadn't seen her wear, a new password on her phone. I told myself I was being paranoid. One night, Lucy's phone lit up while charging on the counter. She was upstairs with the kids, so I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a harmless notification. Instead, it was a message from someone saved as E. The message read, "Last night was unforgettable." A wave of confusion and anger washed over me. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me like a shadow. I'd noticed the signs, small things piling up, but this message felt like the spark that could burn it all down. That night, as Lucy came downstairs and saw me with her phone, she hesitated, a flash of something, guilt, maybe, in her eyes. But she quickly composed herself, a smile forcing its way onto her face. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yeah, just needed to check the time," I replied, handing it back to her. She accepted it without another word, but I felt a chill crawl up my spine as she walked away. From that moment on, I started noticing every detail, every change in her routine. I didn't want to believe my suspicions, but there was a growing, gnawing feeling in my gut that told me to look closer. Lucy had never given me a reason to doubt her before, but now, all I could see were reasons. One Friday night, Lucy mentioned she'd be staying late at the office for a client meeting. Something inside me snapped, and I decided I'd had enough of the late nights and vague explanations. I drove down to her office building, parking across the street in the shadow of a closed cafe, my heart racing like a drumbeat in my chest. I watched as Lucy left the building, not alone, but with a man I recognized from one of her office events. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who exuded confidence in a way I'd always found irritating. They walked together to his car, laughing, and then they embraced. He held her like he'd done it 1,000 times before, his hands sliding down her back as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, they disappeared into his car and drove off. I sat there, staring after them, feeling like I'd been kicked in the gut. 1,000 thoughts tumbled through my head, each one darker than the last. I could feel anger bubbling up, but more than that, I felt a crushing sadness. The life we'd built, the trust one thought was unbreakable, had been torn apart with a single embrace. When I finally drove home, I felt numb, my mind reeling with what I'd seen. How could she? How could the woman I'd shared a decade of my life with, the mother of my children, betray me like this? I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew I had to be smart. I had no proof other than what I'd witnessed, and I didn't want to risk losing everything in a heated moment. The days that followed were torture. I played my role, pretending everything was normal, all the while quietly gathering evidence. I watched her more closely than ever, noticing how often she seemed distracted, how she'd slip away to take calls in another room. I went through her credit card statements, phone records, anything I could get my hands on without raising her suspicion. Slowly, piece by piece, a picture emerged that I couldn't ignore. There were dinner reservations in the city, a hotel booking I knew we hadn't stayed at, and long phone calls to a number I didn't recognize. Every detail felt like a stab to the heart, each one chipping away at any hope I had that I was mistaken. This was real. She was cheating on me. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, the anger gave way to a cold resolve. I was done being the fool, done letting her pull the wool over my eyes. If she thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I'd take control of the situation on my own terms, making sure she'd never see it coming. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know. Each day that passed felt like I was putting on a suit of armor just to get through breakfast. I watched her go through the motions, smiling over coffee, asking me about my day, even planning little weekend activities with the kids. There were moments I almost believed her act myself, that is, until she'd catch herself checking her phone a bit too quickly or slip out of the room to take a call. My mind was already made up. I was going to confront her, but I wasn't about to go in blind. I needed proof that would erase any shred of doubt, proof that would stand up to any defense she might muster. So, I decided to collect every bit of evidence I could find. The first place I started was her phone. I'd seen her on it countless times, texting or checking notifications, but she'd grown careful, locking it when she left the room or slipping it back into her purse at the end of the day. I knew her phone's passcode once, but she'd changed it sometime in the past few months. And that change in itself spoke volumes. Then came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. One night, Lucy was in the shower, and she'd left her phone charging on her nightstand. My hands shook as I picked it up, careful to listen for any sign that she was stepping out of the bathroom. I tried a few passcodes that I thought might work, and on the third try, it unlocked. Relief flooded through me, but I knew I was racing against time. I scrolled through her messages, holding my breath with every swipe. Most conversations seemed innocent enough until I found one thread, hidden under a random man's name, Eddie. I opened it, feeling my heartbeat echo in my ears. And there it was, a series of messages that made my stomach turn. Eddie, last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. Lucy, me too. Wish we could have stayed longer. Eddie, I'll find a way for us to have more time together. You deserve it. I skimmed through the rest, noting dates and times, carefully taking screenshots on my own phone. It was painful to see, but I forced myself to read every word. I had to understand what I was up against. As I scrolled further back, I found the roots of the affair, starting with harmless work banter before growing more intimate over time. It was a long, slow build-up that felt like it was unraveling my entire life. I was tempted to confront her that night. The betrayal was so raw, the words so fresh in my mind, but I restrained myself. I knew I needed more. In the following days, I combed through bank statements and credit card records, trying to line up her purchases with her business trips and nights out with friends. Each new discovery felt like a twist of the knife. Dinners at high-end restaurants, a weekend at a luxury hotel she'd claimed was for a work conference, even a new necklace I'd never seen her wear. I couldn't believe I'd missed it all, the signs blaringly obvious now that I knew what I was looking for. In moments of quiet, away from my anger, I'd sometimes wonder why she did it. We hadn't been fighting, and as far as I could tell, she hadn't been unhappy, at least, she never said she was. Maybe there had been something I missed, some feeling of loneliness she never voiced. But the fact that she could lie to me day in and day out, with that same smile, made any thoughts of understanding slip away. I realized I didn't care about the why anymore. All I cared about was making sure she felt the sting of betrayal the same way I was feeling it now. My chance came one evening after she'd texted me, saying she had to work late again. I played along, texting back that I hoped the night wouldn't be too long, to let me know if she needed a ride home. She responded with a quick, "Thanks, I'll be fine," and I could picture her smiling, confident in her web of lies. As soon as she left, I drove to the hotel I'd tracked down from her credit card records. I parked across the street, tucked away behind a line of trees, watching the entrance. My heart raced, my palms slick on the steering wheel as I waited. It didn't take long. She pulled up in her car, stepping out with a carefully casual glance around her. She was dressed up, looking more like she was heading out on a date than staying late at work. A man joined her a moment later, and I recognized him from the office party, the same man she'd hugged that night. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close as they walked inside. It felt like a slap across the face. All the lies, all the details she'd crafted to keep me in the dark, were laid bare in that single gesture. I could feel rage boiling up, threatening to break through the numb resolve I'd clung to. But I sat there, forcing myself to breathe, letting the anger turn cold. I couldn't risk confronting her now. If I stormed in there, she'd have time to come up with excuses, to try and turn it around on me. No, I'd stick to the plan. I'd hold my cards close until I had everything I needed. The next day, I paid a visit to our lawyer, a friend I'd met back in college who'd helped us set up our wills after our first child was born. I explained everything I'd found, every piece of evidence, and watched his face grow stony as I went on. He was thorough, guiding me through what my options were, and laying out what I needed to do next. He'd seen it all before, but I could tell even he was angry on my behalf. With his help, I started the quiet process of preparing for a divorce, setting up a new bank account in my name, moving some of our joint assets around. I had to be strategic, careful to make sure everything was in place before I pulled the trigger. Once, I might have been sickened by how calculated it felt. But now, it seemed like the only way to take back control. She'd blindsided me with her betrayal, so I'd take my time blindsiding her with the fallout. I wanted her to feel every inch of the ground slipping out from under her, the way I'd felt in those early days when I started piecing it all together. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in our living room, staring at the family photos on the wall, the smiling faces frozen in happier times. There we were, all of us, laughing on a beach vacation, Lucy by my side, her arm around me, our kids playing in the sand. I thought about how much I'd loved her then, how much I'd trusted her. And it felt surreal, almost like looking at someone else's life. Because the woman in those photos, the one I'd thought was mine, was a stranger now. The next morning, I woke up with a clear mind and a calm sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. In a week's time, she'd have no idea what hit her. And when it was all over, I'd be able to walk away with my head held high, knowing I hadn't let her lies destroy me. The final days before pulling the trigger were the hardest. I had all the pieces lined up, everything ready to collapse around her in one swift blow. But holding back, pretending nothing had changed, felt like slowly tearing myself apart. Every glance she threw my way, every "I love you" she muttered as she left for work, felt like acid poured over an open wound. Still, I bit my tongue, keeping my rage buried under a mask of indifference. Soon, I'd be free of her, but until then, I had to stick to the plan. One evening, Lucy surprised me. I thought maybe we could go out for dinner this weekend, she suggested, a forced brightness in her voice. Dinner sounds nice, I replied, forcing a smile. Inside, I could barely stand to look at her. Every gesture, every fake attempt at affection felt staged. But her suggestion worked to my advantage. I could use the night out as the perfect moment to set everything in motion. I made a mental note to play along, one last time. Saturday rolled around, and we went to a small restaurant downtown, one we'd loved when we first moved here. Lucy seemed relaxed, even happy, as she sipped her wine and asked me about my work. I answered her questions as if nothing was wrong, as if this was just another evening, though I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me. It was strange, watching her laugh and smile, knowing what I knew, and knowing that soon, she'd never smile at me that way again. After dinner, she suggested a walk along the nearby river. I followed, pretending to enjoy the evening as she looped her arm through mine. I watched her from the corner of my eye, studying her like she was a stranger, trying to memorize the moment so I could remember it later, after everything was over. When we got home, I waited for her to fall asleep before setting the final stages of my plan into action. I went to my office, the only place in the house where I could be alone with my thoughts. In the quiet of the room, I reviewed everything, the screenshots, the records, the carefully documented timeline. I'd kept it all in a separate, password-protected file on my laptop, a meticulous collection of every lie she'd told and every moment she'd spent with him. Then, I sent it all to my lawyer, making sure he had everything he'd need to initiate the divorce proceedings. I followed his instructions, laying out every detail and making it clear that I wanted a swift, clean break. I didn't want to fight over the house or the bank accounts, I didn't want to drag it out. All I wanted was for her to understand, in no uncertain terms, that there was no coming back from this. I arranged for the documents to be delivered to her at her office, where I knew she'd have no choice but to face the reality of what she'd done. I wanted her to feel exposed, caught, her secret life laid bare in the harsh light of her workplace. I scheduled the delivery for Monday afternoon, a calculated choice to give her the entire weekend to stew over it before she could come home and try to confront me. On Sunday, she acted as if nothing was wrong. We spent the day at home, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd built with her, but one I now felt like a visitor in. I watched her move through our house, oblivious to the storm heading her way, and felt a twisted satisfaction at knowing I'd soon be free of her. When she looked my way, I felt nothing but cold resolve, and it was all I could do to keep from telling her right then and there. Monday arrived, and I left for work like usual. I drove through the morning traffic, wondering how she'd react when she received the documents. Would she be angry? Would she try to deny everything, or would she finally accept the consequences of her actions? I pictured her in her office, trying to keep her composure as she opened the envelope, realizing her secret was out and that her carefully built web of lies had finally unraveled. Around noon, I got a text from her, "Can we talk tonight?" It was short, cautious, and I could tell she was struggling to keep it together. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the day ahead, knowing that by the time I walked through the front door that evening, she'd be desperate for answers. When I finally got home, I found her waiting for me in the living room, a mix of anger and desperation on her face. The sight of her, looking so broken, filled me with a strange sense of calm. I took a deep breath, setting my bag down by the door before meeting her gaze. "So," I said, my voice even. "Did you get the documents?" Her eyes flashed with a mix of fear and anger. "How could you do this?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're really going to throw everything away over nothing?" "Over nothing?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "This wasn't nothing, Lucy. You betrayed me. You lied to me, and you did it over and over again, all while pretending like everything was fine." She shook her head, her hands clenched at her sides. "I never meant for it to go this far," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "It was just a distraction. Something to make me feel alive again. But it didn't mean anything. Not like this." I felt a surge of anger, the kind I'd been holding back for so long. "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated. "Lucy, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed our marriage. You made a choice, over and over again, to lie to my face and pretend that everything was normal. And now you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" She looked away, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her actions was finally settling on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could keep it separate, that it wouldn't change anything between us." "But it did," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "You can't have it both ways, Lucy. You can't betray me and expect me to just forgive you, to pretend like it never happened." She swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this. I'll end it, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, to make it right. But as I looked at her, I felt nothing but emptiness. The woman standing before me was a stranger, someone who'd torn my life apart with a single selfish decision. I'd already made my choice, and there was no going back. "I'm done, Lucy," I said, my voice steady. "I don't want to fix this. I don't want to pretend that things can go back to the way they were. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt a twinge of regret. But as I turned to leave the room, I reminded myself of every lie she'd told, every moment she'd stolen from me. This was the end, and I wasn't about to let her drag me down with her. Without another word, I walked away, leaving her to face the reality she'd created. The house was quiet after she left. In those final, tense days, Lucy had packed up her things, moving through the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow, resigned. She hadn't put up much of a fight in the end, retreating from every room as if she no longer belonged there. She'd left the keys on the kitchen counter, slipping out without a word. And just like that, a decade of my life had vanished, leaving behind only memories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I thought I'd feel free when it was over, that I'd feel a clean break, a fresh start. But instead, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. The silence was unbearable, echoing around empty rooms, filled with shadows of what used to be. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, spending more time with the kids, but nothing seemed to fill the void. Nights stretched long and restless, haunted by the what-ifs that kept circling my mind. One rainy evening, weeks after Lucy left, I was clearing out her side of the closet. I had avoided it until then, but now it was time. As I pulled out the last of her things, my hand brushed against something, a small box tucked behind her shoes. I lifted it, dust coating its edges, and opened it without much thought. Inside, I found a collection of photographs, tucked away like precious secrets. Pictures of our wedding, snapshots from vacations, handwritten notes I'd written her over the years. And under those memories, I found a small, creased piece of paper folded into the shape of a heart. I unfolded it carefully, feeling something sharp twist in my chest as I read the words in her handwriting, written years ago, forever and always. No matter what. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected, memories flooding back in vivid, painful detail. Our wedding day, her smile as we danced under the stars, the vows we'd exchanged. In that moment, I saw her not as the woman who'd betrayed me, but as the girl I'd fallen in love with, the girl I'd thought would always be by my side. And for the first time since she'd left, I felt the sharp ache of regret, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I'd thrown away something that could have been saved. I shoved the box back, slamming the closet door and trying to shake off the feeling. But the thought gnawed at me, refusing to let go. Had I been too harsh? Had I rushed to judgment without trying to understand why? My mind turned over every conversation, every fight, every moment that had led us here, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance, however slim, that I'd made the wrong choice. 2 nights later, as the rain poured down in torrents outside, I picked up the phone. My hand trembled as I dialed her number, my heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and dread. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice answered, not Lucy's, but a nurse's. "Hello. I'm trying to reach Lucy Harrison," I said, confusion threading through my words. There was a pause, and then, with a gentleness that made my blood run cold, the nurse replied, "I'm so sorry. Lucy was admitted here a few days ago. She was in a car accident. I'm afraid she's in critical condition." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I staggered, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself as her words sank in. "Lucy, in the hospital? A car accident?" Images flashed through my mind, Lucy's face, her laughter, the way she'd once looked at me with so much love. And now, here she was, fighting for her life in a sterile hospital room, alone. I drove to the hospital that night, barely aware of the rain pounding against the windshield, the dark streets rushing past me in a blur. When I reached her room, I found her lying pale and motionless, a tangle of tubes and machines surrounding her. Her face was bruised, her eyes closed, as if she were already slipping away. I sank into the chair by her bedside, my hands shaking as I reached out, brushing my fingers over hers. "Lucy," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm here." She didn't stir. The only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor, a fragile rhythm that seemed to mirror the ache in my chest. I sat there for hours, memories flooding back, the weight of my choices settling heavy on my shoulders. The anger I'd felt, the betrayal, all seemed distant now, overshadowed by a regret that felt as though it would swallow me whole. It was just before dawn when her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me, dazed, barely able to focus. I squeezed her hand, leaning closer, my voice a soft murmur. "I'm so sorry, Lucy," I said, my throat tight. I should have fought for us. I didn't see what was really happening, and I'm so sorry." A faint smile touched her lips, and she struggled to lift her hand, brushing her fingers over mine. Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile, fading. "I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know how lost I'd become, until it was too late." I felt my own tears slipping down my cheeks as I held her hand, the weight of our shared pain hanging heavy in the air. "I know," I whispered. "I should have seen it. I should have tried to understand." She closed her eyes, her breath shallow, her fingers curling weakly around mine. "It doesn't matter now," she said, her voice fading. "Just promise me that you'll remember the good. That you won't hate me for the mistakes I made." "I promise," I choked out, my heart shattering as her hand grew limp in mine, her breathing slowing, the beeping of the monitor growing weaker. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I watched her slip away, my last words a whispered plea. "Lucy. I love you." But she was already gone, leaving me alone in that cold, sterile room, surrounded by the silence I'd once longed for. The weight of the finality settled over me, a grief that seemed endless, a hollow ache where anger had once burned. I left the hospital that morning, my life shattered, haunted by the memory of a love I'd taken for granted, a love I'd never get the chance to repair. And as I walked out into the cold dawn, I knew one thing with painful certainty: the revenge I'd sought had come at a cost I could never have imagined, a cost I'd carry for the rest of my life.